So tell us what triggered the Arab Spring and why protests are so, or why they so quickly spread across the region.
Well, 10 years ago, what triggered the protests was the long duration of those who were in power in Tunisia. Ben Ali was there for 23 years continuously. Mubarak had 30 years in power. So a generation grew up seeing only one face, no succession of power, and that was having it to the limit. And that's why the protests were massive, and they could mobilize because they had shared political grievances and shared economic grievances, and could organize on platforms that were new at the time, Facebook and Twitter and such. 10 years later, as your report shows, the different outcomes. Egypt had a change in regime, so did Tunisia, but Syria, which had Bashar for only 10 years at the time, had a divided population thinking maybe he can be the reformist, a better version of his father, Hafez al-Assad, and those who said, no, we should oust him. So that's why Syria went into civil war. So each case proved to be different,
right?
Even though there was a domino effect, in fact, looking at Tunisia, then Egypt, each country thought maybe we would be next.
So tell us what countries have fared the best and fared the worst.
This is not the case anymore. Still, the civil wars than others.
So tell us what countries have fared the best and fared the worst in the Arab Spring.
What country had the best outcomes? I couldn't hear that.
Have fared the best and fared the worst in the Arab Spring?
I think Tunisia is almost miscited as the best example. But I think what happened in Tunisia, for instance, is that there was a rise of Islamism there in a country that used to be the highest educated, the most secular. So actually Tunisia is not the best case, even though some cite it as such. Egypt also is not the worst case, as some people say. This turned into more of a military government. I think it's not as bad as people would frame it reductionally, as if it's just a military government, because there were protests against the Islamist regime that came to power that was backed by a military. I think moving forward, there will each country will face the fact that you could not have single person rule for longer than a term or two. So an advice to any of these countries did Mubarak, because that's the main reason he was ousted and the main reason Ben Ali was ousted. Therefore, the idea that there has to be succession of power is necessary.
Why has the balance of power shifted towards the Gulf states in the last decade?
Because the Gulf states were up and coming. You know, it's almost like a person. They go through phases. They are rising, emerging. They are newcomers. They are new states, right? So they are tapping into their history as a population or a civilization, Arab culture, but they are cutting edge, something almost similar to Israel itself. It has its roots in very ancient history, but it's a new state. It's emerging. So this idea of being where technology is, where science is, where their future would be, shifted that focus to the Gulf, when these other high historical countries like Egypt, Syria, or Iraq were going through all these transformations. So that's why the weight was shifted to the Gulf.